Up next, a middle-aged man looks for some excitement.
He's just like any other guy that would go to a strip club.
And later turns up dead. Police ask if the two are connected.
She said she killed him, and I asked her why, and she said because they told her to.
Police question the dancer's boyfriends.
We do not allow boyfriends or husbands to be in the bar.
Eventually, with forensic evidence and a little luck, the pieces start to fit. Many young men and women dream of working in the television or film industry. Pat McRae fulfilled that dream, and he was good at it.
He worked at Iowa Public Television. He was a video production coordinator. He was very well liked at that place. Friendly face, he's always smiling when I saw him.
McRae typically worked long hours. Unfortunately, it took its toll. In 1997, he and his wife of 12 years divorced. McRae took it hard, but remained a devoted father to his two young children.
We would go over to my dad's every Wednesday, and we'd watch TV, hang out. He would come to my football games, and we'd hang out at the varsity games, and, he'd take us out to eat, go to movies, stuff like that.
McRae never missed an opportunity to spend time with his children, but one morning, there was a problem.
He is supposed to pick up his daughter and take her to school. He's a no-show.
Pat's ex-wife knew immediately something was wrong. She called both his work and home telephone numbers, but couldn't reach him. So she went to his home and used her own key to get inside. And she found Pat dead, just inside the front door.
There was significant blood patterns in the house itself. There were bloody footprints throughout the house.
The evidence shows the attack started in the living room and ended at the front door.
It appeared that someone had used that bathroom to clean up.
Robbery seemed to be the motive. Pat's wallet had been cut from the back pocket of his blood-soaked jeans.
We could see that there had been a number of clothing items disrupted, thrown around on the floor of the closet, and that there was transferred blood on some of this clothing. So at least visually appeared that somebody had, spent some time either searching through the closet or through the clothes.
And the killer left bloody foot impressions outside on the porch.
Of particular interest were that some of these bloody footwear impressions were overlaid, which fairly early on in the investigation gave indication that the one source of these impressions had made more than one trip exiting the house.
The medical examiner estimated that Pat had been murdered sometime on Friday night, about 48 hours before his body was found. Investigators discovered that Pat spent part of that evening at a local strip club, the Outer Limits.
Pat McCrae was a customer that came in, and basically he was a regular as far as maybe once or twice per week. He was a very friendly, a very quiet guy.
When Pat visited the club, he usually arrived around 10 o'clock, but on the night of his murder, he came in early.
I was kind of like, wow, what's he doing in here during happy hour, which was fine. It was kind of unusual for him to do that.
He also did something else no one had ever seen him do before. He asked for a private dance. The dancer's stage name was Mystic.
She was the one that he went in the private area with. Pat moved from the front of the stage and went in the private area. I remember him dancing with Mystic in the back room.
Mystic's real name was Laura England. And for some reason, on the day Pat McRae's body was found, Mystic didn't show up for work. Des Moines police thought they had a suspect in the murder of television station employee Pat McRae, a stripper named Laura England. She performed a private dance for Pat on the last night he was seen alive. 2 days later, she was gone, and Pat was dead.
She stripped Sunday night, danced Sunday night at the Outer Limits, and then she and her boyfriend leave town.
Police issued an all-points bulletin for Laura England. In the meantime, at the crime scene, investigators made some important discoveries. First, there were bloody boot prints throughout the house, and they had been made at 2 different times and several hours apart.
You could see that somebody had exited the house and then apparently re-entered.
The boots were determined to be size 7 Doc Marten brand boots. All the blood evidence in the house was carefully cataloged and analyzed. Dozens of items were submitted for DNA testing.
I ended up taking 70 samples, bloodstains from the crime scene, and processing those all the way through for DNA analysis.
One blood stain stood out from the others. A drop of blood on the comforter on top of the bed. This was different than the smudges that appeared elsewhere in the room. Since the evidence indicated Pat McRae never entered the bedroom after he was stabbed, analysts thought this blood might be the killer's.
There was a little bit of blood evidence in the bedroom, and it turns out that that little bit of blood evidence was probably the most significant evidence that we had in that case.
The droplet was cut out of the comforter and tested along with other blood stains on the bed. The results showed a mixture of blood from 2 people.
One of the contributors of the blood in the house is a female.
The male DNA belonged to the victim, Pat McRae. This meant the killer was a woman.
It's not uncommon for people, when they're stabbing somebody else, to stab themselves accidentally, maybe have their hands slip on the knife, cut the inner sides of their fingers. It's really quite common.
Then police located Laura England, the dancer last seen with Pat McRae on the night he was murdered. But she denied seeing McRae that night and said the club manager must have been mistaken.
She also wore wigs at the time, too, which a lot of dancers have done in the past.
Laura's DNA didn't match the DNA from the unidentified female at the crime scene, and she was released. The DNA didn't match anyone in Iowa State database or the national database either.
We had no one to compare that DNA profile with, or at least I should say we had no one to successfully compare it with.
Investigators were convinced that Pat McRae knew his killer. There was no forced entry into the house, which meant he probably let the killer in. And the blood evidence showed rather brazen behavior. Blood on the front drapes indicated the killer opened the drapes to look outside. The bloody foot impressions proved the killer walked out of the front door after the murder. Not only that, the killer returned several hours later, leaving a second set of boot impressions, this time in dried blood.
That's odd. If you leave a homicide scene, the chances of you going back to that scene and tracking blood out again is not very good. I mean, once you're out of there, you want to be out of there.
The case turned cold, and for the next 5 years, there were no substantial leads. Was it possible that a killer this reckless could successfully elude police? For 5 years, the murder of Pat McRae went unsolved. Investigators had the DNA profile of the killer and boot impressions from the scene. What they didn't have was a viable suspect.
I just kind of gave up worrying about whether or not it would get solved. I mean, I didn't like that it wouldn't, but I had that feeling that there's probably nothing we could do.
Then, Detective Judy Stanley got a call from her counterpart in Lincoln, Nebraska, 200 miles away. Lincoln police had just arrested a man named Mars Davis on a drug possession charge, and Davis offered them a deal. He said he was willing to provide information about an unsolved murder in Des Moines in return for leniency on his drug charge.
I felt tremendously guilty for a long time. I didn't want to think about it anymore. And it bothered me every time I closed my eyes.
Unfortunately, Davis didn't know the name of the victim. He did, however, remember the neighborhood where he lived.
He only knows that he lives at a house someplace off of Harding Road. He knows it's by a convenience store. He knows there's a couple of car washes nearby. Knows that the guy works for a TV station. Knows that he went to the Outer Limits. And knows that he's killed in his house.
Mars Davis was describing Pat McRae's murder, and the details he provided were so bizarre, it was hard for investigators to believe.
It's not a story that you expect to hear every day in the news.
Mars Davis said that 5 years earlier, he was involved with a 24-year-old stripper named Andrea Morris.
She was good at her job. I liked watching her work the room, you know, because you'd see prettier girls or younger girls have trouble, and she would just, you know, mow them over.
Andrea was working at the Outer Limits Club in Des Moines, but Mars wasn't permitted to go inside.
We do not allow boyfriends or husbands to be in the bar. Maybe a customer, you know, might get a little rough with a girl, and her husband or boyfriend thinks he's got to handle the problem when I have employees to handle those kind of problems, you know, and it just causes a disruption.
One night around closing time, Mars picked up Andrea after work, and she said she'd promised to give a bar patron a private dance at his house.
It wasn't entirely out of the ordinary, but it wasn't exactly something that happened all the time, but yeah. And money was pretty tight, so and she didn't ask me, you know, she just said, this is what's happening. And I said, okay. And how do we get there?
Davis said he dropped Andrea off and then went to get his truck washed.
Mars tells her, I'll be back in 1 hour. So he leaves. He actually goes and cleans the Bronco while he's waiting for her to do this private dance.
When he picked her up, he couldn't help but notice she was literally covered in blood.
You want to tell me what the hell happened?
She told me like she got hit in the nose or something, and I was like, oh, that didn't all come out your nose. You know, and because it was in her hair, it was everywhere. You know, when she took her clothes off, it was in her underwear and her socks. You know, and I just kind of went numb after that.
I mean, did he hurt you? Do you want me to go back?
No.
All right. So
When Mars pressed the issue, Andrea finally admitted the truth.
She said she killed him, and I asked her why, and she said because they told her to. She heard voices.
They later checked into a motel, took showers, and got some sleep. Several hours later, Andrea panicked when she realized she left her wallet in Pat McRae's home. She insisted Mars drive her back to Des Moines so she could retrieve her wallet.
Everything in her wallet was coated with blood. I mean, it was like, you know, it'd been sitting in it. You know? It was...
But how could police determine if Mars was telling the truth?
Mars Davis gave us a ton of information that would not have been known to anybody other than that who was at that house.
But how did they know he wasn't involved in the actual murder? For that, police needed to find Andrea Morris. 5 years after Pat McRae's murder, a witness came forward to say he knew the identity of the killer. A nationwide search was on for Andrea Morris, a stripper who was dancing in the club Pat McRae visited on the night of his murder. Des Moines police learned Andrea Morris was recently released from prison in Nebraska after serving 2 years on a drug charge.
She is required to give a DNA sample as part of her release. And so I find out who her probation officer is. I call her up. She says, you know what? I just had to take her DNA the other day.
And it matched the DNA from the blood found in Pat McRae's bedroom. Andrea Morris was arrested at her apartment in Lincoln, Nebraska.
And I introduced myself and told her who I was and that I was from Des Moines, Iowa. When the blood drained from her face, and Terry and I, the other detective that was there, we both commented about that. Wow, do you think she's guilty or not?
But Andrea said she was innocent, that Mars Davis was the killer.
So I don't know which thing made me more angry, being accused of the murder or being called a pimp.
Andrea admitted performing a private dance for Pat McRae in his home and said Pat attempted to assault her.
She said Pat McRae pinned her to the couch and wouldn't let her up and was kissing her, and she was trying to push him away and he wouldn't get up. Next thing she knows, Mars Davis is in the house over them and he's the one that starts stabbing Pat McRae. That was her story.
But there was no blood all over the floor and only one set of foot impressions from a pair of size 7 boots, the same size worn by Andrea Morris. Mars Davis wore a size 13 shoe.
Big difference between a woman's size 7 and a man's size 13. And we didn't have anything to put Mars in the house.
Prosecutors believe that from the beginning, Andrea intended to rob Pat McRae. He sat on the couch in the living room for what he thought would be some harmless entertainment. Instead, Andrea pulled a knife and attacked him. He tried to fight back. The fight moved across the living room to the front door. McRae, weak from blood loss and shock, could no longer fight back. In all, Andrea stabbed him a total of 6 times. She used the knife to cut McRae's wallet from his back pocket. She also took his keys. A tremendous amount of blood had been spilled. Police think Andrea's contention that she got a nosebleed during the struggle was probably the only thing about her story which was true. That's how her blood dripped onto the comforter on Pat's bed. She walked through the rooms, trying to clean up the blood, but there was simply too much of it. Blood found on the curtains showed she opened them to see if Mars had returned. When he arrived, Andrea left through the front door and locked it on her way out, tracking fresh blood across the front porch. Several hours later, when she realized she'd left her wallet behind, she returned, tracking dried blood on top of the foot impressions left earlier, proving there were 2 separate visits, and proving Mars Davis had been telling the truth.
She said that she killed the guy.
You'd say why?
Because they told her to.
They mean
These voices that she heard in her head.
Andrea Morris, almost unrecognizable from her days as a stripper, maintained her innocence. But the jury didn't buy her story. In October of 2007, she was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life without parole.
She deserved what happened. Yeah. And it was a really thing. And I feel kind of about, doing it to her, but, it was either live with it or,
The Pat McRae case shows how a single drop of blood can be the difference between a conviction or an exoneration.
When I calculated the statistics of match on that sample, it turned out to be fewer than one out of 100 billion unrelated individuals would be expected to have that same DNA profile that was found on the piece of evidence.
Forensic evidence was the key to the entire case. There was just great DNA evidence.
It's very gratifying that physical evidence established at the initial scene on the initial day eventually is what ended up absolutely placing her within the scene and being the thing that convicted her.
Up next,
this is a story of my life as a defenseless woman in the Navy.
a naval officer alleges a cover-up and threatens to go public.
But very soon, I will have enough evidence, send to the media, and then something will be done.
But before that can happen, she's murdered, some say by the man she named as her rapist.
And I start suspecting that something is amiss, that this may be all a setup.
Can forensic science separate fact from fiction?
The videotape is startling. It is scary. She is foretelling her own death.
After a long, stressful day working as an air traffic controller at one of the largest naval jet bases in the world, Elise McDessie went to dinner with her husband at an Italian restaurant in Virginia Beach, Virginia. Eddie McDessie worked in the computer business.
He did a lot of contract work, and some of it was for the U.S. Navy. And that is when he met Elise McDessie.
Sometime after 9 p.m., when the couple returned home from dinner, someone was waiting for them. When Eddie regained consciousness, his hands were bound behind his back. He saw his wife tied to the bed and a man raping and stabbing her. Somehow, Eddie managed to free his hands, grabbed the handgun he kept in the nightstand, and shot the assailant. Then he called 911.
Oh, God. My God, so cute. Oh, God, I came here right there. So good. I shot him. Is he breathing? Really?
But the intruder wasn't dead.
The assailant leaped up, lunged towards him with a knife, and Eddie shot the individual again.
When paramedics arrived, Elise was barely alive.
Her dress had been pulled up and her pantyhose had been ripped. She had multiple stab wounds to the chest, and her throat had been cut ear to ear.
She's trying to talk. They absolutely believe she was trying to communicate and could never get the words out. And before anybody could really give her any significant help, she died on the way to the hospital.
The assailant was identified by his driver's license as 37-year-old Quincy Brown.
He was laying with his legs pinned underneath him, laying on his back, and he had 3 gunshot wounds to the chest.
Brown was one of Elise's co-workers at the Oceana Naval Air Base.
Quincy Brown, military man, worked at the same command where Elise worked. So it wasn't a random crime. Something happened to bring co-workers into the same room, and neither one of them left alive.
Elise's husband, Eddie, was treated for his head injury and released. As incredible as Eddie's story seemed, evidence at the scene appeared to support it. The entranceway floor was littered with takeaway containers of leftover food from the restaurant. Electrical cords used to tie Eddie's hands were on the bedroom floor. Underneath the intruder's right hand was the knife used in Elise's murder. And Eddie gave police a videotape that Elise made before her death. It contained some shocking allegations against her superiors in the Navy. Allegations that perhaps the Navy didn't want to be made public. Elise and Eddie McDessie had been married for only 5 years at the time of Elise's murder. They lived in an apartment off the military base and had no children.
Elise enjoyed being in the Navy. She was looking forward to her future as an air traffic controller. Tough job, and especially for females, and she would have been good at it if she had had more time.
Quincy Brown, the man found shot to death in the McDessie's bedroom, had no history of violence.
Quincy had been in the Navy for over 19 years. He was married, he had a child. He did not have any kind of criminal background.
Quincy Brown worked with Elise at the Naval Air Base.
Everybody that we talked to that knew Quincy Brown, that didn't go with his character at all. It seemed to be completely conflict of his character.
But the facts were undeniable. A rape test kit on Elise McDessie showed signs of sexual intercourse, and the biological evidence matched Quincy Brown's DNA. A knife covered with Elise's blood was found underneath Brown's body. But what drove Brown to murder? Eddie McDessie thought he knew why. He said his wife made a videotape before her murder, and he gave it to the authorities.
Sexual harassment, sexual assault, and rape. This is a story of my life as a defenseless woman in the Navy.
The videotape Elise McDessie made is more perplexing to me than anything I've run into in 20 years of covering crime. It is startling. It is scary. You see a woman who is speaking from the grave.
Elise described a tale of horror. She alleged sexual abuse covered up at the highest levels of the Navy.
3 weeks later, after trying my best to avoid his sexual harassment, I got raped in the woman's bathroom. And Egan threatened me and told me, "You can't prove anything, so keep your mouth shut, or else you and your husband can get hurt."
It's a confession of sorts, like a diary. It's almost a video diary of all these terrible things happening to her.
I've made a list of names, placed it in a safe deposit box, in my name only.
Police used a court order to get Elise's journal.
Quincy Brown had been named in her journal as one of those attackers.
Elise listed all 5 men who she claimed raped her while on duty.
At this point, we knew we needed to get the Naval Criminal Investigative Service, NCIS, involved because obviously now we had 2 of their members dead.
The NCIS questioned the 4 other men Elise accused in her journal. They all denied the allegations.
She had accused 4 of the best guys I've ever known, the best guys I've ever worked with. Family men, really decent, respectable guys.
Nancy Simpson was Elise's friend as well as one of her supervisors.
I knew that it was a bunch of crap. Elise never told me that she had been sexually harassed at work. If that had happened, she certainly would have told me. It would have never been covered up.
But Eddie McDessie was outraged. To him, the evidence was clear.
Eddie believes that Quincy Brown went there to shut her up and to make her stop talking about what was going on in the base. Eddie's also said that Quincy was part of a larger conspiracy involving higher Navy forces to keep her quiet.
As proof, Eddie pointed out that Elise had recently been demoted at the Navy base. Eddie claims in retaliation for her sexual harassment claims.
Eddie says they really slowed down her training, reassigned her because of it. He said that she was the victim not only of the harassers, but of the same superiors that she'd confided in.
Then, investigators noticed small inconsistencies in Eddie's story. According to Quincy Brown's cell phone records, he called the McDessie's apartment at 9:36 on the night of the murders, which was after Eddie claimed they were assaulted at the door of their apartment.
The call lasted 2 minutes and 10 seconds. It's out of the ordinary that somebody's going to call and then come over and rape someone and kill them.
The knife found under Quincy Brown's hand, the one used to kill Elise McDessie, didn't contain Brown's fingerprints, and his shirt didn't have Elise's blood.
Quincy gets none of Elise's blood on his body. How in the world could he have done this and not had any of Elise's blood on him?
And on the night before her murder, Elise McDessie bought the gun used to kill Quincy Brown in a sporting goods store in Virginia.
Then I start suspecting something is amiss. This may be all a setup.
But who wanted both Elise McDessie and Quincy Brown dead? And why? In this video journal made shortly before her death, Elise McDessie claimed she had been raped and sexually assaulted by 5 co-workers at the Oceana Naval Air Base. On the tape, she claimed she reported these incidents to her superiors and had been ignored, so she threatened to go public.
Very soon, I'll have enough evidence to send to the media, and then something will be done.
But the Navy denied Elise McDessie ever filed one single claim, let alone 5.
I was her superior, and my immediate superior was a very tough female, tougher than me. There was no word of this. Nothing was ever reported to any of us, and either one of us would have acted immediately.
One of the men Elise named in her journal was Quincy Brown, the man found shot to death in her apartment. Elise's husband, Eddie, claimed Brown knocked him unconscious and murdered Elise to stop her from going public with these allegations. Investigators weren't so sure. To find the truth, investigators started with the only hard evidence they had, the crime scene.
We wanted fresh eyes, somebody to really tell us something that we weren't able to see.
Virginia Beach Police contacted Ross Gardner, a nationally recognized crime scene analyst.
This was a very complex crime scene, and it wasn't until we got a lot of the DNA information back that we were able to make sense of it. But certain aspects of the crime scene analysis certainly supported Eddie's statement.
But then Gardner looked more closely at the crime scene photos and noticed that they contradicted Eddie's story. The autopsy showed that the first shot penetrated Quincy's heart. This creates arterial spurts, high-pressure ejections of blood from the body, and they are easily identified.
Because the blood is ejecting out in a stream, it breaks up into larger masses. And so what we see in an arterial spurt are very large elliptical-shaped stains.
Eddie said when he saw his wife being attacked, he grabbed a gun from the nightstand and shot Quincy Brown as he rushed towards him. Yet, the blood spatter evidence and the crime scene photos showed that Quincy Brown was facing in the opposite direction.
There is no evidence whatsoever that suggests that Quincy was ever standing when that wound was ejecting blood, or that he was ever facing back towards the nightstand. The void in the arterial spurts on the carpet tell us that Quincy was in this kneeling position at the time of the first shot, and that his physical position never altered other than to lay back.
Investigators now had a theory that Eddie McDessie was involved in an elaborate scheme. First, he convinced his wife to make the videotape and written journal, accusing her 5 co-workers of rape and sexual assault. Their plan was to file a lawsuit against the Navy.
Eddie McDessie had told several people that this sexual harassment with his wife in the Navy would be bigger than Tailhook, referring to another civil suit in which someone collected a lot of money from the Navy.
And Elise was a willing participant in the scheme.
It was obvious that they had a plan in action.
It would appear that there may have been some partnership between Eddie and Elise as far as setting this thing up.
They planned to prove their case by luring one of the men she named in her journal, Quincy Brown, to their apartment to have unprotected sex with her, and then claim it was yet another rape. Only this time, they'd have DNA evidence to prove it.
Quincy did not force his way into that apartment. He came there willingly. He had sex with Elise willingly.
Investigators believe Eddie planned to kill Quincy after the sexual act was complete in order to silence him. It's not clear whether Elise was aware of this or not.
Elise and Eddie bought the gun in Hampton, Virginia, the night before this event occurred. I don't know if Elise had planned that Quincy would die. I don't know.
But why did Eddie kill his wife?
Eddie McDessie had taken out a $500,000 life insurance policy on his wife. This was less than 30 days prior to the incident.
That's a lot of money to have in a life insurance policy for a sailor who has no family fortune, is not earning but a low rate in the Navy, not making much money.
This, plus an additional $200,000 from her Navy life insurance, was a significant payout.
The 7 deadly sins, greed is my favorite. And this man loved his money, and he was willing to sacrifice innocent people for $700,000 so he could live the good life.
And he could pin her murder on Quincy Brown.
He's a cold-blooded killer.
Ironically, Elise helped plan, organize, and carry out her own murder.
The only thing that changed is Elise was double-crossed and she was killed in the process as well.
Eddie's plan was almost too perfect. Based on the forensic evidence, prosecutors believe that Eddie McDessie was responsible for the murders of both his wife Elise and Quincy Brown. They believe this whole thing started as a sexual harassment scam against the Navy. Elise McDessie made a videotape and written journal claiming that 5 men sexually assaulted and raped her while on duty at the Naval Air Base where she worked. Despite her claims on the tape, the Navy says she never filed any charges against these men.
Sexual harassment, sexual assault, and rape.
But Eddie and Elise needed forensic evidence. So they invited one of the men she named in her journal, Quincy Brown, over to their apartment for a sexual threesome.
Elise would have claimed that Quincy had raped her, and therefore they would have been able to pursue their sexual harassment claim.
On the night of the crime, there was no assault outside their apartment. When they returned home from dinner, Quincy Brown called their apartment at 9:36, most likely to confirm their date.
Hello? Are we still on for tonight? He said he'll be here in 15 minutes.
Okay, let's get ready.
Investigators believe Eddie set the scene by tying Elise to the bed. To Quincy Brown, it would appear to be a bondage fantasy for the evening. To the police, it would look like a violent assault. When Quincy arrived, he had a condom in his pocket. Perhaps he was encouraged not to use it, although no one really knows.
Go ahead on in. I'm just gonna kick back and watch.
After the sexual encounter, Eddie pulled his first double cross of the evening on Quincy Brown.
Okay, I think you're finished. Break into my house, knock me out, you raped my wife.
They'd blame him for breaking into the apartment and raping Elise. It's unclear whether Elise knew if Quincy would die,
Cut me loose now, Eddie.
but she obviously didn't know Eddie would double-cross her, too. Eddie staged the scene to make it look like a break-in, assault, and a rape murder perpetrated by Quincy Brown. And Eddie collects $700,000 in life insurance.
And maybe he walks away with a sexual harassment case also.
He almost got away with it, too. But in the end, he left too many clues.
It was obvious that Eddie McDessie was lying to me about what had happened and how things had happened in that bedroom.
He told us this happened, this happened, this happened. And multiple claims by Eddie McDessie were refuted by the forensic evidence.
But when it came time to arrest Eddie McDessie, he had fled to Russia.
The problem we're having is that he's now a Russian citizen and we don't have an extradition treaty, so I can't get him out of Russia.
For almost a decade, Eddie McDessie was on the run. Reporter Mike Mather decided to track him down, despite everyone telling him it was useless.
The State Department at the time told me, Virginia Beach Police told me, the embassy told me, you're wasting your time. He's never coming back here. So I said, let's go find out. Sent him an email. He agreed to meet with me. Flew to Moscow.
Apparently, Mike Mather caught McDessie at just the right time. He clearly didn't like living in Russia.
How can I say this? They took my money, they beat me up, they put me in jail because they thought I was an American spy. And here I was without American documents to prove that I'm an American.
McDessie chose to return to the United States and face trial, thinking that Elisa's videotaped allegations would provide the reasonable doubt he needed for acquittal.
I want to do that because I know I can prove I'm innocent. I know that what has happened to me and all this that happened to me, the American people should know about.
14 years after the double homicide, Eddie McDessie went on trial. The forensic evidence was overwhelming.
We, the jury, find the defendant guilty of first-degree murder of Quincy B. Brown, guilty of first-degree murder of Elise M. McDessie.
McDessie was sentenced 2 consecutive life terms.
Ross explained very, very well how the blood spatter evidence contradicted what Eddie said.
It wasn't he said, she said, it was he said and everyone else was dead. It's never left me that Eddie did that, and I've never questioned that he was capable of it. Not even for a second.
Without the forensic evidence, without Ross Gardner and the blood spatter analysis of the crime scene, to be able to disprove Eddie's statement, because all we had was Eddie's statement and the crime scene. And he had a good story.
Before we get back to the episode, if you're listening on Spotify, please take a moment to tap 5 stars. It's one of the easiest ways to support Forensic Tales and helps the show reach new listeners. Thank you so much for being here. To enjoy this episode of Forensic Tales ad-free, check us out on Patreon. Patreon.com/Forensic Tales.
Forensic Tales discusses topics that some listeners may find disturbing. The contents of this episode may not be suitable for everyone. Listener discretion is advised.
An 18-year-old college student goes missing after a night out with friends in Monterrey, Mexico. 2 weeks later, her body is found floating in the water tank of a motel. But even after 3 autopsies, there is still a lot of confusion surrounding her death. This is Forensic Tales, episode number 259, The Mysterious Death of Debony Escobar. In 2021, the Netflix documentary Crime Scene: The Vanishing at the Cecil Hotel became an instant hit. It follows the story of Elisa Lam, a Canadian student who went missing while staying at the Cecil Hotel in downtown Los Angeles in 2013. She was last seen on January 31st and was reported missing by her parents a few days later on February 8th. But just days later, her body was found floating in a rooftop water tank at the Cecil Hotel after guests staying there complained about foul-smelling water. Even now, years later, her case is still a very popular talking point among the true crime community. But as strange as Elisa Lam's case sounds, she isn't the only young college student to mysteriously turn up dead inside a hotel water tank. 9 years later, a similar thing happened to an 18-year-old student from Monterrey, Mexico. This is her story. Debony Escobar was born on September 4th, 2003 in Monterrey, Mexico. I wasn't able to find much about her background or her childhood, but here's everything that we do know. She was an only child, and both of her parents worked as teachers, Mario Escobar Salazar and her mom, Dolores. And in 2022, she was an 18-year-old college student studying at a local university. She was described as a nice, kind girl who dreamed about conquering the world someday. She was also someone who was passionate about helping others. Just a few weeks before she went missing, she joined thousands of other women in protest of gender violence in Mexico. She stood side by side with so many others who wanted the Mexican government to do something to stop the violence against women that's happening every single day. She would have no way of knowing it at the time, but she was about to become a victim herself. On April 9th, 2022, Mario Escobar woke up to a bunch of missed phone calls on his cell phone. At first, he ignored them because he didn't recognize the number. It was probably just spam. But eventually, Mario decided to call the number back to see what was going on because there had been so many calls. He figured it had to be something important if they kept calling. And that's when he got the news that would forever change his life. It was one of his 18-year-old daughter's friends saying that she was missing. No one had heard or seen her in about 4 hours. This is the story that the friend tells him. Debony had gone out with this friend who was calling and 2 other girls. Now, full disclosure, there are some conflicting reports about all of the girls' names. But from what I could find, it was Debony, Yvonne, Alejandra, and Jasari. They all went to a house party in Nueva Castilla, a neighborhood in the northern part of Monterrey, Mexico. But apparently, Debony had a little bit too much to drink, and they all thought that she should probably go home for the rest of the night. They didn't need to be out anymore. So the girls thought that they should get Debony home so that she could just sleep off all the alcohol. So the friends said that they called for a car to come get her and take her home. But not long after Debony got inside of the car, the friends started to get some communication from the driver, saying that she was so drunk and agitated that she couldn't even give him her address so that he could take her home. She even started to get angry with the driver, and she wasn't really making much sense. The friends and the driver go back and forth for a little bit, but she eventually gives him her address. But apparently, just a few minutes later, Debony got out of the car and wouldn't get back in. That's according to the driver, at least. The driver kept telling her to come back inside, but she wouldn't do it. She just stood there, facing away from him with her arms crossed. That's when the driver decided to take a picture of her on his cell phone, just standing there on the side of the road. And he sends it to her friends to basically prove a point, like, here she is. She's just standing there and she won't get back into my car. The friends even forwarded the photo to Mario, the dad. The photo itself is chilling. She's just standing there on the highway. And it's not just any highway. It's Highway 85, which is known as the Highway of Death because of how many women either turn up dead or they go missing from the same exact spot where Debony is now standing, refusing to get back inside of the car. So it's not exactly the best place in the world to be, as a female, in the middle of the night, standing there all alone. So after going back and forth for a few minutes, the driver said that he just left her there and drove away because she was becoming so angry and so difficult. He waited there for about 3 minutes, but she wouldn't get inside, so he was over it. And now the friends hadn't been able to get a hold of her since then. Also chilling, whether that driver realized it or not, he took the very last photograph of her alive, and it would eventually go viral. If you get a chance, hop online and look it up for yourself. At this point in the phone call, Mario knows that he needs to call the police and get on social media to let people know that Debony is missing. By the time the friend had called him, no one had seen or heard from her in about 4 hours. Plus, the last time that she was seen was at a place known as the Highway of Death. And according to the friends, she had been drinking all night. Young women just like her go missing there practically every single day. So time is really of the essence here. The police put out information about Debony, and that's when they got a statement from the other friends who were out with her that night. Now, to be honest, there are a lot of conflicting reports about what exactly happened at this party. And depending on who you speak to, you might get a different version of that story. But based on Devaney's friend's statements to the Mexican authorities, it sounded like she wasn't acting like herself that night. And there may have even been some type of altercation between Devaney and the other girls. They apparently got into a fight, and the friends basically left her at the party there all alone. At one point, they said that Devaney locked herself in one of the men's bathrooms and wouldn't come out. But they knew that she was drunk, so they called someone to come pick her up, the driver who took that photo and is now presumably the last person to see her. Now, here's something that you should know about. The friends didn't contact the driver through the ride-sharing app Didi. That's the company that this guy drove for. It's an app similar to what we use here in the US, like Uber or Lyft. Instead, the friends texted a man by the name of Juan David, also known as Jesus, to come and give her a ride. Jesus worked for the rideshare app and had given the girls a ride earlier in the night. He was also believed to be a mutual friend of at least one of the girlfriends. So this Jesus guy worked as a driver for Didi, but the friends contacted him outside of the app to come give her a ride home, and he gets there at around 4:15 in the morning. It's also worth mentioning here that the girls that Devaney was supposedly with at this party weren't exactly her best friends. Yes, they were friends, but they weren't that close. I think they had only met and gotten to know each other just a couple of months before all of this happened. So that might explain why they would leave her all alone at this party while she was clearly very intoxicated. That's not something that a close friend would usually do. So the search for Devaney begins. Her father, Mario, reported her missing to the police, and the family got a lot of support from the community to help look for her. Social media played a big role in the search. The last photo of her standing alone on that highway was reposted thousands of times. Her friends shared it, family, complete strangers on the internet. Even social media influencers in both Mexico and the United States started talking about it. So by doing this, a lot of people found out about the case really quickly, and they were able to help spread the word. Somewhere along the way, the family got a tip. They got access to the last known location of her cell phone. And this is where things get even stranger. After Devaney got out of Jesus's car, she was seen crossing the freeway and entering a trucking company at around 5 in the morning. She's seen on security cameras entering the building's offices, but is never seen leaving. Now, later on, her family says that they think she went there basically looking for someone to either help her or give her a ride home. They also said that some of the security camera footage from the company has since disappeared from that night, and no one knows why. But in a statement on its website, which is dated April 18th, the company's legal representative said that they were fully cooperating with the investigation, and the family's claims that some of the video evidence was missing is simply not accurate. Part of their statement read, quote, "The company has provided the authorities with the surveillance videos it has, lists of personnel who have already been interviewed by the authorities, and all the information and support it has required. The only relationship of our company with the unfortunate case is its physical location because it is very close to the last place where the missing young woman was seen." End quote. So is some of the video footage missing? I don't know. It depends on who you ask, the family or the company themselves. After that, she's seen again on security cameras walking toward a motel by the name of Nueva Castilla. It's a place about a block and a half south of the transportation company. But none of these videos show her talking with anyone. No one's following her. She's completely alone, and it almost looks like she's sort of wandering around and doesn't know exactly where she wants to go. So as soon as this video evidence surfaced, the search for her focused around this transportation company and the motel, using over 200 drones at one point and search dogs. It was a lot of people's belief that she might be staying in one of the motel's rooms. So they searched it on the 12th and then at least a few more times. But they don't find her or anything connected to her. She's not there. Later that day, the police got something else to work with. They finally found that rideshare driver, Jesus. They had him arrested on unrelated drug charges just so they could sit down and question him. He was, of course, the last person to see her alive. So everyone was on pins and needles waiting to hear what he had to say. And to make things even more interesting, this driver wasn't exactly what you would describe as an upstanding citizen. This guy has a long criminal history, which even includes charges for attempted kidnapping and harassment of young women. So this really piqued the interest of investigators. Debony is missing. She's a young college student. He was the last person that we know of to see her. And he has a criminal record, which includes attempted kidnapping. But he completely denied everything. He told the police pretty much the same story that Debony's friend had told her dad. He said he had given the girls a ride to the party via this rideshare app, but they were the ones who asked him for his personal phone number just in case they needed a ride home later on. Who knows why, but the girls didn't want to use the app. So when they called him later on, he said he went to the party and picked up only Debony. But according to him, the other girls were still at the party too. They got into another car and drove off. Now, this is a little different than what the friends had said before. They said they left Debony at the party, but now Jesus is saying that no, they were definitely still at the party when he got there to pick up Debony. Now, maybe that's just a small detail, but maybe it's not. He told the police that Debony was really drunk when he picked her up, and she wouldn't give him her address or her parents' phone number so that they could come help. She was crying, saying how mean her friends had been to her, and at some point during this short car ride, she asked him for a phone charger so that she could charge her cell phone. But she didn't end up doing that. She doesn't charge the phone. Instead, according to him, she climbed into the front seat of the car and basically started arguing with him even more and almost started to become aggressive with him. That's also when they ended up on the highway and she told him, "Hey, stop the car. I need to get out." And that's what she did. She got out. So he waits about 3 minutes to see if she's going to calm down and get back inside of the car, but she won't. Meanwhile, he's on the phone sending voice messages back and forth with Debony's friends. He's asking things like, did she take any drugs? Why is she acting like this? But the friends were like, no, she just drank a lot of vodka at the house party. So he took that photo and drove away because, according to him, she just wouldn't get back inside of the car. Now, it's unclear why this driver didn't immediately come forward to the police when Debony first went missing. It seems like the authorities had to hunt him down just to speak with him. But regardless, the police searched his cell phone, and pretty much everything that they found on it supported his story. They saw the voice messages back and forth between him and her friends, the phone calls, so everything looks good on his end. So at this point, the police let him go. On top of the surveillance footage from the transportation company and the motel, the police also found video from earlier in the night. And this was the first sign that something really bad might have happened. Video taken at around 11:30 p.m. showed Debony and her friends buying a bottle of vodka to take to the party. Then they eventually ended up at the party in the Nueva Castilla neighborhood. And this is where more and more video evidence surfaces. Later on, at around 1:30 in the morning, Debony is captured on video running down the street. Not jogging, not walking, she's running it. She's booking it down the street. And behind her, there's a guy chasing her who appears to hit her before she turns around and slaps and kicks him. A few moments later, two of her friends come to intervene, and that's when things look like they started to settle down. None of the others attacked the guy or anything. It just looks like as soon as the two friends showed up, whatever happened between this guy and Debony seemed to calm down. Now, after this particular video surfaced, the friends sort of changed their stories a little bit. They now said that the reason why they left the party was because Debony was acting angry and aggressive toward them. This is basically the same exact thing that the driver said, that she was being aggressive. And now this video surfaced with her getting into a physical fight with this unknown guy. So maybe that's why the friends decided that enough was enough. It was time to send her home. She had already locked herself inside of the bathroom. She got into a fight with this guy on video. And according to her friends, she just wasn't acting like herself. Now, several more days go by and there's still no sign of her. Despite the traction that the case got through social media and everywhere else, no one knew where she was. She hadn't contacted anyone, and there was zero activity on both of her bank accounts and on her cell phone. It was like she was just gone. But then April 22nd happened, 13 days after she went missing. Employees at the motel, the same one that she was seen around the night that she went missing, reported a very foul smell coming from the property. They had searched all of the rooms but didn't find anything. It was just the strange smell. So they eventually decided to call the police, thinking that it might be something serious. When they got there, the employees walked the police to the pool and courtyard area because that's where the smell was coming from. And by the courtyard were also 3 water wells in the ground. 2 of them were open, but 1 of them was covered. These were essentially 12-foot subterranean water tanks for the motel. And when they looked inside the one that was covered, they discovered a body in a pretty bad state of decay in about 3 feet of water. And based on the clothes found inside of the water tank and a crucifix necklace, it was pretty obvious that it was Debony. DNA tests would also later confirm that it was definitely her. So despite 4 different searches of this particular motel by the Mexican authorities, it wasn't until its employees reported that smell that they finally found her. She had been in that tank for days, leaving her body almost unrecognizable. So how could they have missed her? Well, besides Debony's case, the Mexican authorities had a lot of others on their hands. This was all happening at a time when killings of women have dramatically increased in recent years in Mexico. According to NPR, they went from 977 cases in 2020 to 1,015 cases in 2021. And those were just cases that were classified as femicides, a legal term used in Mexico when women are killed simply because of their gender. Killings of women in general are actually much higher than that. Here's the reality. Some crime reports say that Mexico is a country where around 10 women are murdered every single day. Disappearances of women are also extremely high. They go missing, their cases don't receive nearly as much attention as this one did, and they're simply never found. They're gone, and no one knows what happened to them. Here's another example of that. Just 1 week before Debony disappeared, another woman was killed in Monterrey, a woman named Maria Fernandez. She was 27 years old and allegedly murdered by a friend of hers who was arrested shortly afterward. Her story has been closely tied to Debony's, but received far less attention than hers. Now, here's an even more interesting data, according to NPR. During the time that the authorities were searching for Debony, the local media reported that the bodies of 5 other women and young girls had been found all across the state. And that's just within a 2-week time frame. They had all been reported missing around the same time as Debony, and 4 of them were younger than 16. So this is real life. Debony's case wasn't the only one happening in the same exact time in the same state of Mexico. Some people might say it's because the Mexican law enforcement agencies out there simply don't care about female victims like maybe they do males, something that we'll talk about at the end of the episode. But others say that it's just an oversight why they didn't find her sooner. Again, despite 4 searches of the motel, drones, search dogs, hundreds of people, she was right under their noses this entire time. At first, the police seemed to suggest that Debony had simply fallen into the 12-foot hotel water tank and accidentally drowned. They knew that she drank a lot that night, vodka, and multiple witnesses said how strange and weird she was acting. So for the Mexican authorities, this was all they needed to say that this was a drunken accident. But when her family heard that that's what law enforcement was saying, they said absolutely not. This couldn't have been any type of accident, and we have the forensic evidence to back up our claims. So let's get right into it. Let's talk about what the forensic evidence is. 3 separate autopsies would eventually be done. The first was done by the Mexican government, the second was at the family's request, and the third one was meant to be an independent investigation to see which side was correct. Now, that's already something to think about. All 3 autopsies and all 3 medical examiners had the same forensic evidence to consider. But yet, all 3 of them came up with completely different opinions about what happened to her. Same forensic evidence, different conclusions. Support for this episode comes from Smart Labels. Have you ever gone on a hunt for a holiday decoration that you know you have, but you just can't remember where you put it last year? Well, those days are over with Smart Labels. With their QR code labels, you can just put a label on your storage container, scan the QR code with the Smart Labels app, and then catalog everything you put in the container with a name, description, and picture. Then just let the app know where you put the container, and voila. Next year, when you need that one thing, you can just do a search in the app and it will tell you the color of the label, the 4-character code on the label, and where you put it. Or if you're curious what's in a storage bin on a high shelf, just scan the QR code with the app and it tells you everything that's inside. It's like organizing magic. So this holiday season, whether you get these labels for yourself or a gift for someone else, make sure you pick up a pack on Amazon by searching for Smart Labels, one word, and get ready for a huge thank you from your future self. Starting with the first one, done by the Mexican government, the official autopsy. According to the Attorney General's office, her cause of death was a deep contusion to her skull, and the manner of death is likely an accident. Their theory is that she got the skull injury from accidentally falling into the hotel's 12-foot water tank and drowned. So that's their narrative, based on their autopsy and the interpretation of the forensic evidence. They found a massive injury to her skull, a deep contusion. She was found lying in a couple feet of water. She had been drinking heavily at a party all night long. So this was all an accident. A drunken accident involving a young female victim. Case closed. There were no other injuries noted in the autopsy report, no mention of a sexual assault. They made it seem like the one and only injury that she had was the skull injury, which could be easily explained by an accidental fall down into the water tank. They made no conclusions about how or why she fell and drowned. They just simply reported that's what they believed. Again, case closed. But the family completely disagrees with this. There was no way that they thought this was an accident. No matter how much or little she actually had to drink that night, she didn't end up in that hotel water tank by accident. So that's when they demanded that a second autopsy be performed. Let's talk about it now. The online newspaper El País, which I used the translated English version for, reported that the second autopsy completely ruled out the government's accident theory. Their findings suggested that Debony was already dead before she ended up in that water tank. She had been hit in the head several times with what the second medical examiner described as a blunt object. So there's no way that this could have been any type of accident. If she had died from blunt force trauma to the head before she ended up in the water, it would have been impossible for her to do this on her own. That means that someone else had to be responsible for her ending up in that water tank and ultimately her death. Someone must have dropped or pushed her into the tank after they killed her, so the cause of death was ruled to be a deep cranial contusion. But that's not all this second autopsy found. The report also said, quote, "The body presented traces of a violent sexual relationship," end quote. So on top of being struck in the head with some type of blunt object, there was also forensic evidence suggesting that she had been sexually assaulted, evidence of multiple head trauma before death, and evidence of a sexual assault. This is completely different than what the government found during their autopsy just a couple weeks before, where they made no mention of a sexual assault. They also made it seem like she died inside of the water tank from the fall, not that she was already dead before getting inside. So which one is it? Was she alive before she ended up in the water tank? Or was she dead before? And was she sexually assaulted that night? Again, same forensic evidence, but clearly very different conclusions about what all of it means. Because if there's evidence of a sexual assault, this is probably murder. If she was dead before ending up in that water tank, this is probably murder. If she had multiple blunt force injuries to her head, this is probably murder. None of that screams accident. Again, the government's autopsy reported only one traumatic skull injury, and there was no mention of sexual assault. But the second autopsy reported that she had multiple injuries to her head and face, including the frontal region of the skull, injuries to both of her right and left eyelids, injuries to the side of her nose, both of her lips, and injuries to her right ear. That's a lot more than a single contusion to the skull. Here's a quote directly from the report, translated to English. Quote, "The craniofacial contusions are of external origin to the body, and because they are intense, repeated, and with different angles of impact, it follows that they were caused by another person and that it was a violent homicidal death." End quote. The report specifically says that the blows must have been delivered with a, quote, "blunt mechanical agent." When it comes to the idea of her drowning, the tank only had about 90 centimeters, or 35 inches of water in it. The first autopsy report noted that her body must have been face down in the water since the back appeared, quote, "dark and dehydrated, while the front was softened by the water." But according to the second forensic report, no water was found inside of her lungs, essentially ruling out drowning as a cause of death. Another point suggesting that she was already dead before ending up in that 90-centimeter pool of water. So there was no way that she could have drowned either. So for the first time since Devaney was reported missing, her family finally felt like they might have enough to persuade the local police to do something. They had in the palms of their hands what they believed to be the forensic proof that this wasn't an accident. This was murder. But after the second autopsy, the case went nowhere. It essentially turned cold. The police didn't go out and arrest anyone, and prosecutors didn't file any criminal charges. It was like the authorities still considered it a closed case. So about 2 months later, a third autopsy was done, and her body had to be exhumed at this point. The goal of this third autopsy was to figure out which side is correct, the government's autopsy or the family's. It was meant to be an independent investigation that didn't belong to either side. They weren't supposed to have any dogs in the fight. Well, I don't know if that's what happened, because after this third autopsy, there only seemed to be more confusion. According to the third autopsy, the cause of death was actually asphyxia by obstruction of respiratory orifices, or in other words, suffocation. But their report didn't specify what exactly blocked her nose and mouth and caused her to die. They also said that there were no signs of sexual assault, something that completely contradicted the second autopsy. According to the head of Mexico City's Forensic Service Unit, she hadn't been assaulted like previously thought. Also, they now believed that Debony had only died about 3 to 5 days before her body was found, suggesting that she was alive somewhere for about a week after she disappeared. But they offered no explanation about where she was during that time that everyone was searching for her, or whether she was being held somewhere against her will. They even made it seem like maybe she was voluntarily missing for a week and maybe foul play wasn't involved. One of the things this independent investigation said was that if someone had kidnapped Debony and held her captive for several days, no one tried to collect a ransom or anything like it. And if there was now no evidence of a sexual assault, then maybe she didn't want to be found for some reason. And this isn't a murder at all, which again completely contradicts everything found in both the first autopsy and the second one. Neither one of those autopsies suggested that she might have been alive for several days after being reported missing. It was only the third autopsy that made any mention of that. So now here's where we're at. First autopsy, accidental fall down into the motel's water tank, 1 skull contusion, no other injuries, no signs of sexual assault. She died the night she went missing. Second autopsy, murder, multiple blunt force trauma injuries to her head, face, and skull, clear signs of sexual assault. She was dead before she ended up in the water because there wasn't any water inside of her lungs. And now the third autopsy, suffocation, no evidence of sexual assault. She only died 3 to 5 days before her body was found, suggesting that she was alive for about 1 week after she went missing. And there's no real signs pointing toward murder or foul play. She might have just been simply missing on her own free will. They don't know what caused the blockage to her nose and mouth, the suffocation, and there was no ransom for her return. So what evidence is there to suggest that this was a homicide? So that's 3 separate autopsies performed by 3 different medical examiners. Same forensic evidence, same everything. So how could they all come up with completely different causes of death, manners of death, evidence of sexual assault, time of death, location of death? Nearly everything is different. How can that be when forensic evidence is supposed to be something that's consistent and concrete? Despite whatever findings that were made during the third autopsy, Debony's family continues to say this was murder. This couldn't have been any type of accident. And they aren't the only ones who right now are fighting for what they believe is justice in this case. Immediately following her disappearance, her story has become a symbol of what many people say is happening to so many women all across Mexico. They're disappearing, they're being assaulted, they're being murdered, and no one, specifically law enforcement and the Mexican government, are doing anything about it. Let's not forget, the police searched that particular motel 3 different times, but they didn't find her. So was this just maybe sloppy police work? Or is there some other explanation for why it took them so long to find her? Well, here's another thing that you should know about. When the police first went to the motel, the employees apparently said that their cameras didn't record anything. They were only used for real-time monitoring. Well, sometime later on, the police raided the motel and some of the employees' houses. And on a laptop, cell phone, and USB drives, they found some recorded videos of Debony at the motel property the night that she went missing. But nothing exactly incriminating was said to be found on these videos. They really only show that Debony did go to the motel at around 4:30 that morning. She's completely alone, no one's with her. She disappears from the camera's views for about 20 minutes and then reappears near the location of the water tanks at around 5 o'clock in the morning. But none of the cameras actually show her going inside of the water tanks. It just shows her in the general vicinity of them. And again, no one else is seen on the video, kind of giving some credibility to this accident theory. Since no one else is captured on the water tanks or around the water tanks, then maybe she went there on her own. Now, as far as why the motel employees tried to hide these videos, we don't know. But here's what we do know. In January of 2023, the Mexico City Daily published an article saying that 2 hotel workers were being charged with obstruction for failing to turn over the videos to the Mexican authorities. What, if any, connection they have to Debony's death, no one knows yet. And as of today, these criminal charges are currently pending, and neither one of the hotel workers has officially been convicted of anything yet. But it definitely makes you wonder why anyone would lie about these videos or try to hide them in the first place, even if they don't show anything incriminating. About a month after Debony's body was found, some of her identification was found in some plants near a condo building. Now, according to Vallarta News, it doesn't sound like it was her driver's license or anything like that. It's just some type of other ID that might have something to do with her dad's teaching job. Also strange, this condo building is over 10 miles away from the motel where her body was found. So, what was this identification doing all the way over there? And does this discovery have anything to do with the case? We don't know. So if the family believes that Debony could have been murdered and sexually assaulted, then who do they think could be responsible? Well, as far as suspects go, Debony's family, especially her father Mario, believes that the taxi driver who gave her a ride home that night or tried to give her a ride home that night might be involved. They think that the reason why she got out of the car was that he may have inappropriately touched her or tried to come on to her in some sexual way, and she rejected him. Mario says that the prosecutor's office had some type of video evidence of this. And in an interview with CBS News, the dad was quoted as saying, "I suppose that my daughter did not put up with the harassment," end quote. I think what the family is saying is that they think the driver might have inappropriately tried to touch or assault Debony, but may or may not have anything to do with what happened to her afterward. But the Mexican authorities have all but dismissed these claims, saying in that same CBS News article that there was zero evidence that Jesus was responsible for her death. And there was no evidence that he tried to sexually assault her during that short car drive before he dropped her off on that highway. So it's unclear what exactly Mario, the dad, saw in that video footage with her daughter inside that car. It's really unclear. As far as any other suspects go, it's also unclear if there are any others at this point. We don't know where the case currently stands with the Mexican authorities. Do they think that this was a murder? Or are they trying to push this under the rug and saying that it could have been some type of accident? There are still so many aspects of her case that remain a mystery and remain unexplained. Why was she acting so strangely at that house party, becoming angry and aggressive towards her friends and toward that rideshare driver? Was it because of the alcohol that she drank that night? Or did she take any other drugs that we don't know about? If Debony really was murdered, then why hasn't anyone been arrested yet? It seems like there are plenty of possible suspects. The other kids at the party that night? Their friends? What about the video of Debony getting into that fight with that guy? Do any of her friends know anything? More than what they've already told the authorities? And what about all the different autopsy findings? If the first autopsy is incorrect, the one that was done by the Mexican authorities, Is it because whoever performed the autopsy just made a mistake about what caused her death? Incompetence on their part? Or some people speculate whether it's because of corruption. They knew she was the victim of foul play, and for some reason, they tried to cover it up and said the forensic evidence meant something that it didn't. How can there be so many different interpretations about the forensic evidence? No one can even agree on a cause of death or when exactly Debony died. Was she dead before she ended up in the water tank? Or was she killed sometime afterward? And what about these findings from the third autopsy suggesting that she only died a couple of days before ending up in the water tank? How does anyone explain that? Almost as soon as word broke about Debony's disappearance, hundreds of women marched through the downtown area of Mexico City and its suburbs. And it wasn't just Mexico City that saw protesters. Other communities throughout Mexico saw them as well. They were women taking to the streets with signs saying things like "no to harassment" and "Mexico is a mass grave." They were all out there protesting and marching against women's violence in Mexico and how they think no one is doing anything about it. It wasn't just Debony who went missing. Women go missing throughout Mexico every single day. And these activists are fed up because they don't think the police or the prosecutors are moving quickly enough, and they aren't properly investigating these types of crimes. This just became a case that people latched onto and started taking to the streets about. Maybe it was because the police searched the motel so many different times and never found her. Others were shocked that a rideshare driver would just leave Debony all by herself, clearly intoxicated, all by herself alone on that sketchy highway. And of course, thousands of people saw that haunting photo of her taken by the driver. Most of the marches were peaceful, unlike they had been in the recent past. Most people just marched with signs. Some read things like "justice" or 24,000 are missing. Others had small photographs of other missing Mexican women. According to an article by CBS News, the number of missing people has risen to over 100,000 all across Mexico. At the same time the marches were happening, Nuevo León Governor Samuel Garcia made a statement saying that he would increase funding and resources to help combat gender violence. I'm not sure if those promises were ever followed through on. Over 2 years later, there are still so many questions surrounding Debony's death inside that motel water tank. Was she murdered? Was she held captive somewhere before ending up in the tank? And if so, who's responsible? Will we ever get to the bottom of this and get justice for her family? Or has there been some type of cover-up? And finally, the biggest question, at least for me personally, why did all 3 autopsies come to such different conclusions about the forensic evidence? Deliberate? Negligence? Corruption? Incompetence? To share your thoughts on this week's episode, follow the show on Instagram and Facebook. To find out what I think about the case, sign up to become a patron at patreon.com/forensictales. After each episode, I release a bonus episode sharing my personal thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe to Forensic Tales so you don't miss an episode. We release a new episode every Monday. If you love the show, consider leaving us a positive review. You can also help support the show through Patreon. Thank you so much to this week's newest patrons, Jackie C., Tim D., and James. Thank you for joining me this week. Please join me next week. Until then, remember, not all stories have happy endings. Forensic Tales is a Rockefeller audio production. The show is written and produced by me, Courtney Fretwell. For a small monthly contribution, you can help create new compelling cases for the show, help fund research, and assist with production and editing costs. For supporting the show, you'll become one of the first to listen to new ad-free episodes and gain access to exclusive content. To learn more, please visit patreon.com/forensictales. Forensic Tales is a podcast made possible by our Patreon producers, Tony A., Christine B., Sherry A., Michael D., Nicola, Jerry M., Megan G., Ureli, Jerry, Ann F., Carol A., Shannon D., Marianne C., Lois B., Lynn H., Ashley S., Alice B., Danielle D., and Savannah. If you'd like to become a producer of the show, head over to our Patreon page or send me an email at Courtney@forensictales.com. For a complete list of sources used in this episode, please visit forensictales.com. Thank you for listening. I'll see you next week. Until then, remember, not all stories have happy endings. Before we get back to the episode, if you're listening on Spotify, please take a moment to tap 5 stars. It's one of the easiest ways to support Forensic Tales and helps the show reach new listeners. Thank you so much for being here. To get this episode of Forensic Tales ad-free, please visit patreon.com/forensictales.
Forensic Tales discusses topics that some listeners may find disturbing. The contents of this episode may not be suitable for everyone. Listener discretion is advised.
A little after sunrise on December 5th, 1982, a Mississippi truck driver made a shocking discovery along the highway. A lady was floating face down in the river. The truck driver ran back to his truck to call the police. But when the police searched the river, they found no sign of the woman. Instead, they made a disturbing discovery of their own. There was the body of a young child floating in the river. This is Forensic Tales, episode number 157, The Delta Dawn Story. Welcome to Forensic Tales. I'm your host, Courtney Fretwell Areola. Forensic Tales is a weekly true crime podcast covering real, spine-tingling stories with a forensic science twist. Some cases have been solved with forensic science, while others have turned cold. Every remarkable story sends us a chilling reminder that not all stories have happy endings. As a one-woman show, your support helps me find new compelling cases, conduct in-depth fact-based research, and produce and edit this weekly show. As a thank you for supporting the show, you'll get early ad-free access to weekly episodes, shout-outs in episodes, priority on case suggestions, and access to weekly bonus episodes. To support Forensic Tales, please visit patreon.com/forensictales. or simply click the link in the show notes. Before we get to this week's episode, we've got a brand new supporter that I want to thank. Thank you so much for Nora for becoming a patron of the show. You can also support the show by leaving a positive rating with a review. Now, let's get to this week's episode. The sun rose for the day a little before 7 a.m. on December 5th, 1982 in Moss Point, Mississippi. Moss Point is a small city in Jackson County, only 26 square miles, with only a few thousand residents. But everything about this small town was about to change forever. A little after 7 a.m. on December 5th, 1982, a truck driver made a disturbing discovery while driving along Interstate 10. He decided to pull over to get a closer look. That moment, he spotted the body of an adult female lying face down in a blue plaid shirt near the river's bridge. He quickly hopped back inside his truck and called the Jackson County Sheriff's Department, the leading law enforcement agency in the area. Within moments of the trucker's phone call, a dozen Jackson County Sheriff deputies were on the scene. But when the first responding police officers arrived at the river, they didn't see a body. There was no female victim wearing a plaid blue shirt. So the officers decided to expand their search down the river, thinking maybe the body floated downstream from where the trucker first spotted her. Not long into their search downstream, the officers made a disturbing discovery of their own. But it wasn't the body of an adult female wearing a blue plaid shirt like the trucker described. Instead, Jackson County officers discovered the body of a small, blonde-haired child. The little girl was partially submerged in the river close to the bridge. But the Jackson County police officers were too late. The toddler was already dead. The girl appeared to be just a baby. She didn't even look like she was 2 years old yet. She had short, strawberry blonde hair that barely stretched past the ends of her ears, and she was wearing a flower-embroidered dress with diapers. Based on where her body was discovered in the river, the Jackson County Sheriff's deputies theorized that she had likely been thrown from the bridge. And based on the level of decomposition and bloating throughout her little body, the investigators believed she was thrown in the river at least 2 or 3 days earlier. Not only did Jackson County investigators have a homicide on their hands, a baby, but they also suspected there was another victim in the river, possibly the baby's mother. The trucker called the police earlier that day to report the body of an adult female wearing a blue plaid shirt. But the police found no adult body where the driver said he saw her. Instead, they found a baby downstream. What also troubled investigators was the location of the child. The section of the river where her body was discovered had been heavily infested with weeds and overgrown plants. It would have been nearly impossible for anyone driving on the bridge or Interstate 10 to see her. The only reason why the child's body was discovered was that the police were searching the area on foot, looking for the adult female. They just so happened to stumble upon the child's body. Otherwise, her body was completely obscured from passing motorists on the highway. This suggested to the police that there might be 2 victims in the river. A baby girl that they had already found, but there could also be a second victim, the adult female found by the trucker. The police wondered if the child and the adult female could be related. Maybe they were searching for the child's mother. Jackson County Sheriff's deputies continued to search the river for the adult female. It quickly became an all-hands-on-deck search to find this woman. The department brought in all possible resources. Additional police officers were called to the scene to help search the area around the river. Helicopters and boats were brought in to search the river by water and air. According to the trucker, the woman was floating face down close to the bridge. So the police knew her body could have floated downstream for several miles. But even after the river was extensively searched by land, water, and air, they couldn't find her. The adult female was nowhere to be found. She was long gone if she was ever there. 3 days into the search, the police found something, but it wasn't the person they were searching for. On December 8th, 1982, 3 days after the woman was reported and the discovery of the small child, another body was found in the river. A team of underwater search and rescue divers found the skeletal remains of an unidentified male at the bottom of the river. The remains were found underneath the I-10 bridge about 60 yards away from the child's body. Because the divers only found skeletal remains, investigators theorized this body had been in the water for much longer than the child or the missing adult female. An autopsy on the remains determined they belonged to a young African-American male. Whoever this person was had died at least 6 months earlier and appeared to be completely unrelated to the case. Although only skeletal remains were discovered in the river, the pathologist discovered the victim had been shot in the head before being thrown off the bridge and into the river. But that's all the autopsy revealed. The police couldn't identify him, and he became known as the Moss Point John Doe. While Jackson County investigators continued their search of the river, the small child's body was taken to the medical examiner's office for an autopsy. Her autopsy revealed she was an otherwise healthy toddler between the ages of 1 and 2. She was Caucasian with curly strawberry blonde hair. She was around 2 feet 6 inches tall and weighed about 25 pounds. Because she had been in the river for up to 3 days before her discovery, the medical examiner couldn't tell what color her eyes were. Her eyes had been clouded so severely by the murky river water that it was impossible to tell if they were blue or brown. But the medical examiner thought they could be any color. When her body was discovered in the river, she wore a pink and white checkered dress with flowers. She was also wearing a diaper, like you'd expect a child her age would. Her overall physical appearance was described as healthy. Her body didn't appear to show signs of significant trauma or abuse. And although the medical examiner didn't find any food inside her stomach at the time of her death, she didn't show any signs of malnourishment. By all accounts, this toddler seemed well taken care of and appeared healthy. When the medical examiner studied the child's body for injuries or clues as to the cause of death, he discovered that someone had tried suffocating her. She had significant bruising and suffocation marks on her face and mouth. But suffocation wasn't the child's cause of death. The medical examiner found a significant amount of river water inside the lungs. The water in her lungs suggested she was still alive when she entered the water. She wasn't killed by suffocation, she drowned. Based on the location of her body off the I-10 bridge, the medical examiner theorized she must have been thrown off the bridge, and that's how her body ended up in the river. It's believed that whoever killed the toddler first tried suffocating her. When that didn't work, her body was thrown off the bridge and she died by drowning. This theory explains the injuries to her face and the water inside her lungs. When the autopsy was completed, the medical examiner determined 2 things. 1, the toddler was a victim of homicide, and number 2, she died by drowning. She was still alive when she entered the water. But the medical examiner couldn't figure out one important detail: who this toddler was. Who would suffocate or drown a 1 or 2-year-old little girl? A little girl who appeared healthy and well cared for. Was the missing adult female also seen floating in the river somehow involved? And where was this missing adult female, and who was she? Jackson County investigators received numerous tips about an adult female seen in the area around the Interstate 10 bridge. Several witnesses told investigators that they saw a young adult female carrying a baby along Interstate 10 a few nights before the baby's body was discovered. The same woman carrying a baby was also seen on Mississippi State Highway 39. According to the witnesses, the woman matched the description seen by the truck driver of the woman floating in the river. She was wearing a blue plaid shirt and blue jeans. As soon as the police received this description, they wondered if it was the same woman. According to the eyewitnesses, the woman was last seen walking west along I-10 close to the truck scales at the Alabama-Mississippi border, sometime between midnight and 1 o'clock a.m. on December 3rd. Many witnesses said the woman caught their attention because she appeared distressed. Several witnesses even approached the woman carrying the toddler and asked her if she needed help. But whenever someone offered to help, the woman allegedly refused and said that everything was fine. According to some of these witnesses, the woman even became angry when they tried to help her. Another key witness approached the Jackson County investigators about the mysterious woman and toddler seen walking along I-10. This witness said that she had been monitoring CB radio in the area and overheard several truck drivers talk about the woman during the early morning hours of December 3rd. Many truck drivers explained how they tried approaching the woman because she was walking along the freeway, but the woman became angry when anyone approached her. Several of the truckers even expressed concerns that the toddler didn't have any shoes on and was barefoot. It was far too cold for a baby that age to be outside on the side of the freeway with no shoes on in the middle of the night. Investigators immediately began trying to find this woman because they believed the deceased toddler might be this woman's daughter. And this woman could be the same woman the truck driver spotted lying face down in the river but was nowhere to be found. But despite an intense effort to locate this mystery woman, the police didn't find her. Her body was never recovered from the river, and no one came forward to the police claiming to be the woman seen walking along I-10 wearing a blue plaid shirt and blue denim jeans, carrying a toddler. Newspapers throughout Jackson County began publishing stories about the case. The articles talked about the child's discovery and the sightings on Interstate 10 and Highway 63. The hope was the stories would generate additional witnesses. Maybe there was a key witness out there who had the information the police needed to identify the toddler or find the missing woman. Many of these newspaper stories even featured forensic facial reconstructions of how the girl might have looked if she were still alive. They just needed one person to recognize the girl and call in an important tip. But that phone call never came. No one called the police with any promising information about who this girl was or who her mother was. In the early days of the investigation, a woman came forward to the police saying that she had given away her daughter. According to the woman, she gave her child away to a group of men. Initially, the police were hopeful that this woman's story was true, and her daughter might be their unidentified child. But when Jackson County detectives investigated the woman's claim, it turned out to be false. As it turned out, the woman didn't actually have a daughter. She only had a son, and she hadn't given him away to a group of men. Now, it's unclear why exactly the woman came up with this story, but it had nothing to do with the investigation. So unfortunately, the woman's story was a waste of investigators' precious time. The girl discovered in the river on December 5th, 1982, remained nameless for several weeks, and the identity of the woman seen carrying her a few days before her discovery remained a mystery. Without an identity, the Jackson County Sheriff's Department had no choice but to label the toddler as a Jane Doe. She became known as Baby Jane. Early in the investigation, Mississippi locals Virgil Moore and his wife, Mary Ann Moore, started a fundraiser to raise money for Baby Jane's funeral. Virgil and his wife, Mary Ann, couldn't imagine a baby being buried without a name or a proper burial. So they asked money from local businesses and funeral homes to ensure the toddler received a Christian burial. Mary Ann was the one who named the baby Baby Jane, so she could at least have a name on her tombstone. Baby Jane's funeral was held at the Bethel Assembly Church in Jackson County, Mississippi. Hundreds of locals gathered at the church to mourn the loss of someone so young. It was especially tragic not knowing her true identity. Her funeral was attended by approximately 200 people, including 4 police officers who've served as pallbearers for her small casket. After an hour-long funeral paid for by the fundraising efforts of Virgil and Mary Ann Moore, Baby Jane was buried at the Jackson County Cemetery in Mississippi. She was buried beneath a flat granite marker with a ceramic vase. Her headstone read, Baby Jane, and known only to God. The mystery surrounding her identity captured widespread attention. People started referring to her as Baby Jane and Delta Dawn. She got the nickname Delta Dawn because she was discovered near a river delta. The Dawn part of her name came because her body was found in the early morning hours of December 5th, 1982. And for years, she would be known simply as Delta Dawn. Delta Dawn's true identity remained a mystery for the next several years. How or why she was thrown off that bridge into the river was a complete puzzle. Investigators didn't even know the identity of the woman seen in the area carrying a barefoot toddler either. There were so many unanswered questions for so many years. This case was particularly difficult for investigators because of the victim's age. But there seemed to be one theory the police stuck to over the years. And that theory was that the woman seen carrying the toddler near the I-10 bridge and Mississippi State Highway 63 was the child's mother. And the mother either intentionally or unintentionally threw the baby off the bridge and into the river. But what happened to the mother after that? Over the years, investigators theorized after the woman threw her child off the bridge, she might have committed suicide. This theory explains the truck driver's story, who claimed to have seen a woman matching her description face down in the river. But if this woman is Delta Dawn's mother, why hasn't she been found? Especially if she committed suicide. Her body seemed to have simply vanished. At the time of Delta Dawn's discovery in December 1982, police departments had limited forensic and DNA testing capabilities. In a best-case scenario, investigators could collect DNA for blood typing. If DNA was collected from a body or crime scene, they could identify the person's blood type, but that was it. Police departments couldn't do much with DNA in the early 1980s. The first national DNA database didn't come around until many years later. CODIS began as a pilot project in 1990, 8 years after Delta Dawn's body was found. And the DNA database didn't become fully operational until 8 years later in 1998. So even if investigators in 1982 had DNA, it didn't do much. The investigation into Delta Dawn's identity remained cold for years. For many years, people wondered if we would ever find out who Delta Dawn was or who her mother was. In 2002, 20 years later, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children got involved. They hired a forensic artist to create a facial reconstruction of the toddler. In 2002, a two-dimensional facial reconstruction was created to show how she might have looked at the time of her death. A picture of the two-dimensional facial reconstruction was then posted to the organization's website. They also deployed 2 members of Team Adam, a group of retired law enforcement officers with experience in these types of cases, to gather more information, including crime scene photos of Delta Dawn. By 2002, investigators also had the power of social media and the internet. At the time of Delta Dawn's discovery in 1982, most people didn't have the internet. So in 2002, the reconstructed image of Delta Dawn was circulated across the internet. But the 2D image in 2002 didn't lead to much. It turned out to be a massive letdown for investigators. On the 25th anniversary of Delta Dawn's funeral, the Jackson County community held a memorial service in her honor. The service was held at the same place where 200 community members attended her original funeral 25 years earlier at the Bethel Assembly Church in Jackson. 2 Alabama women named Marjorie Brinker and Lynn Rouse organized the memorial. Both women agreed to organize the service because they, quote, couldn't comprehend why someone would throw a baby into the river like that, end quote. The people of Jackson County were determined to find out who the Delta Dawn was. If they could identify her, they could take the next step and figure out what happened to her. If they knew who she was or her mother, they could finally sleep better, understanding what happened to her and who was responsible for her drowning in that river. By 2009, Jackson County investigators decided to try something new. It had been 27 years since she was found, so they needed to do something different if they were going to try to identify her. And by 2009, DNA and forensic testing had come a long way since the early 1980s. Jackson County officials began by exhuming Delta Dawn's body in early 2009. After the body was exhumed, it was returned to the county medical examiner's office so any remaining DNA could be extracted. Unfortunately, though, after almost 3 decades, there wouldn't have been much, if any, soft tissue remaining in the body. So investigators extracted Delta Dawn's DNA from her skeletal remains and bones. Once they had her DNA, a sample was submitted to both the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System and the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. From there, investigators with both organizations compared the DNA to DNA collected from unsolved murders and missing person reports. After a lengthy search, the DNA comparison didn't turn anything up. Delta Dawn's DNA didn't match anyone in the databases. So the next move investigators made with Delta Dawn's DNA was to look for her mother. But that search didn't lead anywhere either. Investigators didn't find anyone in the databases with a DNA profile similar to Delta Dawn. When the DNA comparison turned up empty in 2009, Delta Dawn's remains were reburied at Jackson County Cemetery. Then investigators tried something else. With advances in forensic technology, detectives created several forensic facial reconstructions of the toddler in an ongoing attempt to identify her. The first forensic facial reconstruction image was made shortly after her discovery, and the most recent was created decades later in 2014. Some images were created to depict how she looked when she died around 18 months old, but other images attempted to show how she might look when she got older. Each time a forensic facial reconstruction was created, it was then circulated through the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children databases. But the reconstructions never generated anything promising or her true identity. Following the latest forensic facial reconstruction created in 2014, the mystery of Delta Dawn's identity deepened. But unfortunately, it would be another 5 years before investigators saw any further progress in the case. In 2019, the Jackson County Sheriff's Department brought Delta Dawn's remains to Othram, hoping that new genetic testing would generate leads to help identify her. Othram is a private lab located in Texas, specializing in complex and advanced DNA testing. According to its website, Othram is the first private laboratory built to apply the power of modern parallel sequencing to forensic evidence. Their scientists are experts at finding and analyzing human DNA from trace amounts or degraded or contaminated samples. Generally speaking, private forensic labs like Othram in Texas can successfully test even the tiniest or most degraded DNA samples. These labs can do things most publicly funded law enforcement crime labs can't. Since Othram opened its doors for business in 2018, they have assisted many police departments across the country in testing DNA in unsolved cold cases. They have assisted in countless unsolved murder investigations and helped identify many John and Jane Does. By 2019, Jackson County cold case detectives hoped Othram could help them finally identify Delta Dawn. For many police departments, using a private lab is their last resort. In most cases, they have already done everything possible to try to solve the case. But in cases like Delta Dawn, sometimes private labs can step in and help. But getting a private lab to conduct genetic genealogy isn't cheap. It can cost over $5,000 per case to conduct the proper testing and research. In Delta Dawn's case, the genetic testing was privately funded by a New York woman. This woman first heard about Delta Dawn's case when she was only 8 years old. When she heard about the story, she was the same age as Delta Dawn would have been if she were still alive. When she heard the story about a woman carrying a toddler along Interstate 10 without shoes, the story broke her heart. So on her 40th birthday, she decided to do something to help move the case forward. She decided to privately fund the genetic genealogy testing. As soon as the Jackson County Sheriff's Department brought Delta Dawn's remains to Othram, their scientists got to work. Othram's experts applied proprietary enrichment methods and forensic-grade genome sequencing to create a genetic profile. This genetic profile of Delta Dawn was created in hopes of generating new investigative leads. Although the exact nature of Othram's proprietary enrichment methods isn't known, this is what their website says about their forensic-grade genome sequencing. According to Othram, forensic-grade genome sequencing applies all the powers of modern sequencing and genomics to forensics, enabling human identification from the most challenging pieces of evidence. Now, the amount of DNA police departments submit to private labs like Othram can vary. Sometimes there is a relatively good amount of DNA, but that's not always the case. In Delta Dawn's case, Othram had less than 1 nanogram. To put this amount of DNA into perspective, 1 nanogram equals 1 billionth of a gram. Using the DNA equivalent to less than 1 nanogram, scientists at Othram were able to generate a complete DNA profile of Delta Dawn. Using the DNA profile, Othram began genealogical research on the sample, looking for familial matches. Through this genealogical research, they identified a woman in Joplin, Missouri. She was 57-year-old Teresa Spencer. She was the only person they found across several databases with DNA related to Delta Dawn. As soon as Othram told Jackson County detectives they found a familial match in the case, detectives headed straight to Teresa Spencer's house in Joplin, Missouri. When they arrived at her house, Teresa Spencer's first thought was that they had found her sister's remains. That's the moment the police learned the name Alicia Ann Heinrich. Teresa Spencer told the investigators that her sister, Gwendolyn May Clemens, had been missing since 1982, and she also had an 18-month-old daughter named Alicia Ann Heinrich. After 38 years, Delta Dawn's real name was finally restored as Alicia Ann Heinrich. DNA testing confirmed that Teresa Spencer was her aunt, the first relative identified through genetic genealogy. And further testing proved Gwendolyn was Teresa's sister and the mother of Delta Dawn, Alicia Ann Heinrich, both of whom vanished in 1982. Gwendolyn Clemens married Alicia's father during her early 20s, and she gave birth to Alicia in 1981. At the time of Alicia's death, she was only 18 months old. Although Jackson County investigators continue to work on what happened to Gwendolyn and her daughter Alicia, investigators have a theory. Gwendolyn's family told the police that she might have gotten romantically involved with another man outside her marriage to her husband, and the man she was seeing was also married. It's suspected that Gwendolyn left her husband and took her daughter, 18-month-old Alicia, to Florida with her new boyfriend to start a new life. But this new life and relationship didn't work out. After Gwendolyn and Alicia traveled to Florida, the boyfriend returned to Missouri, but Gwendolyn and her daughter weren't with him. When the boyfriend returned to Missouri, he returned to his wife. He never told her about the affair with Gwendolyn. Instead, he came up with an excuse that he had some sort of mental breakdown and just needed to get away for a while. The wife took him back, but after only he sought counseling so that this would never happen again. Only it did happen again. A few weeks after leaving Gwendolyn and her daughter and returning home to his wife, he left again. This time, he met another woman and moved out. Alicia and her mom, Gwendolyn Clemens, were last seen by her family in Joplin, Missouri, right before the Thanksgiving holiday in 1982, just before Gwendolyn and her boyfriend traveled together to Florida. But when the boyfriend returned to Missouri alone, Gwendolyn was never heard from again. Several years after Gwendolyn disappeared, her unidentified boyfriend passed away from cancer. Unfortunately, he died long before investigators identified Delta Dawn or her mother. It's also unclear if Gwendolyn was the one seen carrying a toddler on Interstate 10. The skeletal remains of the unidentified African-American male found in the same river 60 yards away from Delta Dawn were also positively identified in 2020. When he was discovered, he was given the nickname Moss Point Jane Doe because investigators had no idea who he was. Through advanced DNA testing, he was identified as Gary Simpson. His positive identification made investigators officially conclude his death was unrelated to Alicia's case. Although his body was found in the same river while searching for Alicia's mother, his death was unrelated. He had been shot and killed about 6 months before Alicia was discovered. After 3 decades, Delta Dawn's true identity was finally revealed through genetic genealogy. Her gravestone once read, "Known only to God," but now reads, Alicia Ann Heinrich. The search for Alicia's mother, Gwendolyn Clemens, continues. Although her family, including her sister, believes she was also killed, it's unclear what happened to her. She was last seen in Kansas City, Missouri, on or about November 24th, 1982. She might have also been seen in Jackson County, Mississippi, near the Alabama state line on the night of December 3rd, 1982. However, these sightings haven't been confirmed as being her. Gwendolyn Clemens was 23 years old when she went missing in 1982. If she were alive today, she would be in her 60s. At the time of her disappearance, she was between 5 feet 2 inches and 5 feet 8 inches tall. She weighed anywhere from 105 to 135 pounds. She had hazel eyes and strawberry blonde hair, just like her daughter. One theory about the case is Gwendolyn threw her daughter Alicia over the bridge and then killed herself in a murder-suicide. This theory lines up with the medical examiner's findings that Alicia was suffocated and then thrown off the I-10 bridge. It also explains the truck driver's story about seeing the adult female in the water. But the theory doesn't explain where Gwendolyn's body is now. So if she also committed suicide by jumping off the bridge, why haven't we found her body? In a December 2020 press conference, Jackson County Sheriff Mike Ezell told reporters, quote, "We do not know if Gwendolyn is dead or alive at this point. We're assuming the worst, but we don't know that for sure," end quote. A second possible theory is that Gwendolyn's unidentified boyfriend murdered both Gwendolyn and Alicia. After December 1982, the boyfriend allegedly returned to Missouri on his own without Gwendolyn or her daughter. People who suspect the boyfriend had something to do with Alicia's murder and her mom's disappearance say the two could have gotten into a fight. And maybe Gwendolyn left with her daughter Alicia, and that's why she was seen walking along I-10. Then the boyfriend followed her and murdered Gwendolyn and her daughter. But getting additional information directly from the boyfriend to prove this theory is impossible. He passed away several years ago. However, he is still considered a possible suspect in the case. Jackson County authorities continue collecting evidence and conducting interviews to find out who killed 18-month-old Alicia and what happened to her mother. Anyone with information about this case or Gwendolyn Clemens' whereabouts is asked to contact Jackson County Sheriff's Department at 228-769-3036 or Mississippi Coast Crime Stoppers at 877-787-5989. To share your thoughts on the Delta Dawn story, be sure to follow the show on Instagram and Facebook. To find out what I think about the case, sign up to become a patron at patreon.com/forensictales. After each episode, I release a bonus episode where I share my personal thoughts and opinions about the case. You'll want to listen to this one because I'm going to share with you what I think happened to her and her mom. Don't forget to subscribe to Forensic Tales so you don't miss an episode. We release a new episode every Monday. If you love the show, consider leaving us a positive review or tell friends and family about us. You can also help support the show through Patreon. Thank you so much for joining me this week. Please join me next week. We'll have a brand new case and a brand new story to talk about. Until then, remember, not all stories have happy endings. Forensic Tales is a Rockefeller audio production. The show is written and produced by me, Courtney Fretwell Areola. For a small monthly contribution, you can help create new compelling cases for the show, help fund research, and assist with production and editing costs. For supporting the show, you'll become one of the first to listen to new ad-free episodes and snag exclusive show merchandise not available anywhere else. To learn about how you can support the show, head over to our Patreon page, patreon.com/forensictales, or simply click the support link in the show notes. You can also support the show by leaving a positive review or telling friends and family about us. Forensic Tales is a podcast made possible by our Patreon producers, Tony A., Nicole L., David B., Nicole G., Paula G., Christine B., Karen D., Sherry A., Elizabeth M., Michael D., Lisa S., Nicola, and Nora. If you'd like to become a producer of the show, head over to our Patreon page or email me at Courtney@forensictales.com to find out how you can become involved. For a complete list of sources used in this episode, please visit forensictales.com. Thank you for listening. I'll see you next week. Until then, remember, not all stories have happy endings.